Today I'm gonna show you how to solve Leetcode question 1020 number of enclaves. Basically, you're giving a m multiplex n binary matrix grid, look like the example here, and 0 represents C and 1 represents length cell. Move consists of walking from one length cell to another adjacent, so it's 4 direction. It's not like all direction. It's only basically using this one cell as an example. You can only move to the left, the right, upper, and down. That's basically 4 direction length cell or walking off the boundary of the grid. Return the number of length cells in grid for while we cannot walk off the boundary of the grid in any number of moves. Looking at the example here, and this is the input and the output is 3 here, and the explanation is there are 3 ones that are enclosed by 0 and one that is not enclosed because it's on the boundary. So this one does not count because it's on the boundary. And let's take a look at another example. This is the second example, and the output is 0. The reason is because all ones are either on the boundary, like in this case, or can reach the boundary. So these ones that does not count at all because they're connected with the boundary, it can reach the boundary, so they cannot count. And then these ones that they cannot reach the boundary at all, and then they cannot walk off, that's why they count. So basically what this question is asking is that you need to write a function to count the ones that are inside, does not connected to all the boundary. So let's think about what we can do here. And the first thing came to my mind is that this is a graph problem, right? And you want to use depth search in this case to basically find all the ones, and you want to define a depth search function to count all the ones first, and to make sure you don't visit the cell that you have already visited. You should use a visit set so that it won't visit again. And then after that, the trick of this problem is that you don't want to count any ones on the boundary, and you also don't want to count the ones are connected with the boundary. So in that case, after we have that function, what we can do is we want to iterate through the graph on the this row and the last row here, and then these cell, just we want to iterate through everything on the boundary and the boundary's neighbor to make sure that we don't count these. Once we visit these and we add them to the visit set, and then we can run the depth search function in the middle section to make sure we count the ones. Because the boundary and the boundary's neighbor already added to the visit set, so when we count the ones in the middle section, we won't count them again. So basically that's the thought process, and I'm gonna show you how to do this in code here. Typically, you want to define a graph and the rows and columns equals. This is basically just how you define a graph in Python, and then this is length 0. And like I mentioned that I don't want to visit the cell that I have already visited already, so I want to use a stat for visit. Can't type today. And then we want to rule out some edge cases, like if not grid, simply grid does not exist, or not a grid 0, then we want to return 0, right? In that case, that's 0 cell. The output will be 0. So the most important thing is we want to define the depth first search. So for the depth first search, I'm going to pass two parameters. One is the row and the other one is the column. So if the row is in the boundary like this, is within the boundary, and 0 is the column is also within the boundary, and the grid, if the grid row column equals 1, right? And if the row and the column not in visit, I have not visited this yet. If all these requirements are met, basically within the range, and the ones are the value of the cell is 1, and also I have not visited, I want to add this row and column pair to my visit set so that I won't visit it again. Once I add it to my visit set, I want to visit its neighbors, basically depth first search, all 4 directions. It said that this one is adjacent 4 direction list, so I'm gonna do upside and down 4 times, and it's pretty straightforward, and the neighbor will be our +1 -1, and the colon +1 and the colon -1. So that's it of the depth first search function. Then the next step I'm gonna do is, what I wanted to do is I want to iterate through all the cells in the boundary and find out their neighbor to run depth first search on these. So make sure that the boundary cell and the island that are connected to the land that are connected to the boundary are added to the visit set. So when I actually count middle numbers, I won't visit the boundary cell again. So to iterate through these boundary lists, I will have to do the rows and the columns. So basically for row in range rows, every single row, right? I want to run depth first search on the row, and the column I want to do 0. So every single row, and I want to do column 0, and I want to run the depth first search on the row and the column -1. It's basically what I visited is this. That's the depth first search R and 0. And then the next one I want to do depth first search on is the R and the columns -1. So it's basically 0, 0, 0, 0 here, right? So I visit these. So the next for loop, I want to iterate through the columns. So the columns, we only need to do these 2 and then these 2, right? So for C in range, it will start from 1 instead of 0 because we have already added. So column -1, I want to run depth first search on row 0 and then the column. So row 0, right? And then I also want to run depth first search on rows -1. Basically, it's the last row, and then the column will be the column that I have specified. Basically, this guy, and this guy, and this guy, right? So after these 2 for loops, and I have already iterated through the boundary cell and then the boundary cell's neighbors, because the depth first search the depth first search function itself actually already went through their neighbors. So then the final step, what I would do is I will start counting the result, right? Let's give it a result to as 0 for R in range rows. So every single row for C in range of calls. So every single column that if grid RC, if the grid value equals 1, so in the middle section, if it's 1, that I will count it. And another big requirement is that the row and column not in visit, because in these two steps, I have already visited the boundary cells, so I don't want to visit these again. And then once every time I found one cell that meet this requirement, I want to add one to the result. And then after the entire for loop, I want to return my result. Yeah, so basically that's it for the code. And by doing this, you should be able to calculate the output. Let's see if we can get through. Okay, the output is expected. Okay, great. So I hope this is helpful, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll have more questions coming for you. And I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.